At 3 o'clock in the morning, on an empty Ohio highway, a luxury silver Mercedes was instantly transformed into a twisted cage of steel. No skid marks, no attempt to survive. The speedometer needle was frozen at 120 miles per hour. When police pried open what was left of the door, they found the body of a young NBA superstar. But what the coroners found in his blood later made even hardened detectives shudder. It wasn't just alcohol. It was a chemical cocktail so potent it could have killed a man before the car even hit the pole. Authorities rushed to close the case, writing it off as just another drunk driving accident by a reckless millionaire. But why, then, do his friends still whisper about a mysterious briefcase full of cash that vanished without a trace from the crash scene? Who was he running from that night at such insane speeds, as if death itself was chasing him? And what shameful secret of the NBA's golden era did they try to bury with him in that closed casket? Today, we are reopening a file that has gathered dust for 40 years. You will learn about the dark underbelly of a glittering league, parties where cocaine was served on silver platters, mafia debts that no one dares speak aloud, and the double life that led a talented young man to a dead end on a lonely highway. To understand why Terry Furlow died on that highway, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go to a place where hope was a scarce commodity and survival was a daily job. We are going back to Flint, Michigan in the 1950s and 60s. Close your eyes and imagine a city made of gray skies and smokestacks. Flint was not a place for dreamers. It was a place for workers. It was the beating heart of the American auto industry. General Motors owned the town. Every morning, the whistles would blow, and thousands of men would march into the factories to build the cars that America drove. It was a hard life, a gritty life. The air smelled of sulfur and burning rubber. If you were born in Flint, your path was usually set in stone before you even took your first steps. You would grow up, you would graduate, and you would go to the factory. You would spend 40 years tightening bolts on an assembly line until your back gave out, and then you would retire. That was the script. But Terry? Terry Furlow refused to read from that script. Even as a child, he carried himself differently. He walked with a swagger that bordered on arrogance. In a city of gray, he was technicolor. He knew, deep in his bones, that he was meant for something bigger than the assembly line. He was meant for the spotlight. Basketball in Flint was not just a game. It was a religion. It was a way out. The playgrounds of Flint were legendary battlegrounds. They were rough concrete cages where boys became men through sweat and blood. If you could survive a pickup game in Flint, you could play anywhere on the planet. And Terry? He did not just survive. He dominated. Former neighbors and childhood friends remember him well. They recall a boy who was fiercely competitive, almost frighteningly so. He did not just want to beat you. He wanted to embarrass you. He wanted to make you regret stepping onto the court with him. He had a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. Was it arrogance? Perhaps. But in a place like Flint, arrogance is a shield. It is armor. If you do not believe you are the king, the city will crush you. Terry developed a playing style that was pure aggression. He was a scoring machine. He had a jump shot that was as smooth as silk, but his eyes were cold. He played as if he was angry at the rim. He played as if every point he scored was a middle finger to the poverty and the destiny that Flint tried to force upon him. But this hunger came with a price. Even back then, people whispered about his temper. He was volatile. He clashed with authority figures. He hated being told what to do. It was this same fire that would propel him to the NBA, but it was also the spark that would eventually burn his whole world down. Fast forward to the mid-70s. Terry escapes Flint. He lands at Michigan State University, a Big Ten powerhouse. This should have been the happiest time of his life. He was the big man on campus, the star, the one everyone came to see. And make no mistake, he delivered on the court. He was an offensive juggernaut, shattering scoring records that had stood for years. In his senior year, He averaged nearly 30 points a game. 30. That is unheard of in college basketball, where defenses are tight and possessions are slow. But while the fans cheered for his jump shots, behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. This is where we see the first real cracks in the foundation, the first signs that Terry Furlow was on a collision course with disaster. You have to understand the climate of America in the mid-70s. The civil rights movement was still fresh in everyone's memory. Racial tensions were simmering just beneath the surface, especially in major institutions like universities. And at Michigan State, things were about to boil over. The head coach was a man named Gus Ganakis. He was old school, strict, disciplined. He believed in control. Terry Furlow did not believe in control, at least not when it was someone else controlling him. The tension between the star player and the coach was palpable. It was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then came the incident that the university tried to hush up, the scandal that threatened to derail everything. It was a walkout, a protest. In a moment of heated frustration, amidst accusations that the coaching staff was treating black players unfairly, Terry led a walkout. He and several other African-American players simply left. They refused to practice. They refused to play by the rules of a system they felt was exploiting them. This was a dangerous move. In the 1970s, a black athlete labeled as a troublemaker or a radical could find his career over before it began. The professional scouts were watching. The men in the expensive suits, the gatekeepers of the NBA, they were taking notes. They saw a player who was incredibly talented, yes, but they also saw a player who questioned authority, a player who could lead a mutiny. Most young men would have backed down. They would have apologized, kept their heads down, and protected their future millions. Not Terry. He stood his ground. He eventually returned to the team, but the damage was done. The label had been affixed to his forehead. Difficult. Unmanageable. A risk. He finished his college career as a legend in terms of statistics. He was arguably one of the greatest scorers Michigan State ever produced, some say even better than Magic Johnson purely in terms of shooting ability. But while Magic Johnson was known for his smile and his leadership, Terry Furlow was known for his scowl and his rebellion. As he prepared for the 1976 NBA draft, he thought he had the world at his feet. He thought his talent would overshadow everything else. He was wrong. The shadows were already lengthening, and the demons of the professional league were waiting for him with open arms. 1976. It was the year of the bicentennial. America was celebrating 200 years of freedom with fireworks and parades. But in the smoky backrooms where NBA general managers made their decisions, there was no celebration. There was only calculation. The NBA draft of 1976 has gone down in history as one of the most peculiar, and some would say, cursed drafts of all time. It was a turning point for the league. This was the moment when the NBA merged with the ABA, the American Basketball Association. The ABA was the wild, rebellious younger brother of the NBA. It had the red, white, and blue ball, the slam dunk contests, and the players with the massive afros and the even bigger attitudes. Suddenly, the NBA was flooded with talent, but it was also flooded with a new culture, a culture of excess, a culture that was rapidly embracing a new, fashionable drug that was sweeping through the discos and the VIP rooms of America, cocaine. We need to pause here and really look at this era. If you were watching basketball on TV back then, you saw the short shorts and the high socks. You heard the squeak of sneakers. But you did not see what was happening in the locker rooms after the game. You did not see what was happening in the hotel rooms on the road. The league was teetering on the edge of a precipice. Drugs were becoming the fuel for the players' lifestyle. It was not just a few bad apples, it was an epidemic in the making. Terry Furlow was projected to be a top pick. With his scoring numbers, he should have been the face of a franchise. He expected to be the savior of a team. But on draft night, he slid. He fell to the 12th pick. Why? Because the whispers had traveled from Michigan State to the NBA front offices. He is trouble. He is a hothead. He was selected by the Philadelphia 76ers. On paper, it sounded like a dream come true. Philadelphia was a contender. They had money. They had prestige. But for Terry Furlow, this was not a blessing. It was a curse wrapped in a ribbon. Why? Because Philadelphia was the home of Julius Erving, the doctor, Dr. J, the greatest player on the planet at that time. Imagine the psychology of this. Terry Furlow, the man who believed he was the best scorer in the world, the man who needed to dominate the ball to feel alive, was now placed on a team where he was destined to be a shadow. He was drafted to be a backup, a spectator. For a man with an ego as fragile and massive as Terry's, this was a psychological death sentence. He arrived in Philadelphia with his fur coats and his expensive jewelry, looking like a king, but he was about to be treated like a pawn. And when a man like Terry feels disrespected, when he feels caged, he does not sit quietly in the corner. He looks for an escape. And in 1976, the easiest escape was waiting for him in tiny glass vials and folded paper packets, sold by men who did not care about his jump shot, only about his money. The trap was set. Let us step inside the Philadelphia spectrum in the late 70s. The noise, the smoke, the electricity. The 76ers were the rock stars of the league. They were the team everyone wanted to watch. And at the center of it all was Julius Erving, Dr. J. He was elegant, articulate, and defied gravity. He was the golden child. And then there was Terry. Terry Furlow sat on the bench. Just picture him there, arms crossed tight over his chest, legs bouncing nervously, watching, waiting. Every minute he sat there was an insult to his talent. He knew in his heart that he could go out there and score 20 points in a quarter if they just gave him the chance. But the coach kept him sitting. The relationship between a star and his backup is always tricky, but this was toxic. Terry did not hide his disdain. He did not clap when the starters made a good play. He sulked. He grumbled. Reporters began to notice. He would give quotes to the press that were laced with bitterness. "I am better than these guys," he would imply. "They are holding me back." But the tragedy of the golden cage is that he was getting paid. He had the lifestyle of a star without the playing time of a star. He had too much time and too much money. Those are the two ingredients for disaster for a young man from Flint. It was during these long, lonely nights in Philadelphia that the habit started to form. When you play 40 minutes a game, you are too tired to party all night. You go back to the hotel, you ice your knees, you sleep. But when you play 5 minutes, you have energy to burn, you have frustration to release. The nightlife of Philadelphia embraced him, the clubs, the music, the women. He was still an NBA player after all. He was tall, rich, and famous. Doors opened for him, and behind those doors, the new friends were waiting. Not the teammates who urged him to practice harder, but the hangers-on, the leeches, the dealers. Whispers began to circulate around the league. Scouts talk, trainers talk. Furlow looks tired in practice. Furlow's eyes look glassy. Furlow missed a meeting. These were small things at first, easily dismissed as the behavior of a disgruntled young player. But looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see the pattern forming. He was building a wall around himself. On one side was the basketball court, where he felt rejected and undervalued. On the other side was the nightlife, where he was treated like a king, where the drugs made him feel invincible, where the validation was instant and chemical. He was living a double life. In the locker room, he was the moody backup. In the streets, he was Terry the Terror, the life of the party, the man with the bottomless wallet. But the problem with double lives is that, eventually, the two worlds collide. And for Terry, the collision was coming faster than he could have ever imagined. To understand the path Terry Furlow walked, we have to stop looking at him for a moment and look at the world he was living in. If you think of the NBA today, You think of billion-dollar endorsements, hyperbaric chambers, and kale smoothies. But the NBA of the late 1970s, that was the Wild West. It was a league in crisis. Attendance was down, TV ratings were in the toilet, and in the locker rooms, a new silent player had joined almost every team. They called it the White Lady. Cocaine. It started as a status symbol. It was the champagne of drugs, reserved for the rich, the famous, and the invincible. And who felt more invincible than young NBA players? They were men in their early 20s, suddenly handed wads of cash that would make a factory worker's head spin, and released into cities where they were treated like gods. There was no drug testing. Let me repeat that. There was no drug testing. The league turned a blind eye. As long as you showed up for the game and put the ball in the hoop, what you did until 4 a.m. was your business. Terry Furlow didn't just step into this world, he dove into it. He was a man who loved speed. He loved the rush. And the culture of the league in those years whispered a dangerous lie, that this white powder wasn't an addiction, it was fuel. It kept you awake after back-to-back games. It made you feel powerful when the coaches shouted at you. It numbed the pain of bruised knees and bruised egos. For a player like Terry, who was already fighting a war against authority figures and his own insecurities, the nightlife became a sanctuary. The dealers didn't bench him. The dealers didn't yell at him to play defense. They smiled, they shook his hand, and they took his money. He began to surround himself with a new kind of entourage, not basketball minds, but fixers, people who could get him what he needed when he needed it. This wasn't just Terry's problem, it was a plague. We would later see legends of the game, names like David Thompson, John Lucas, and eventually the tragic Len Bias, fall victim to this same era. But Terry was one of the early casualties. He was riding a wave that was about to crash, and he was doing it without a life vest. He was buying expensive cars, wearing furs that cost more than a house in Flint, and living fast. But in the NBA, you can't outrun your reputation. And the league was starting to whisper that the Golden Boy was becoming toxic. By 1977, the Philadelphia 76ers had seen enough. The talent was there, undeniable, electric talent, but the baggage was too heavy. They shipped him off to the Cleveland Cavaliers. On paper, this looked like a fresh start. Cleveland needed scoring. Terry needed minutes. It should have been a match made in heaven. But Terry Furlow carried his ghosts with him. He arrived in Cleveland not with humility, but with defiance. He felt insulted that Philadelphia had traded him. He felt he was being punished. And then he met Bill Musselman. If you wanted to design a coach specifically guaranteed to clash with Terry Furlow, it would be Bill Musselman. Musselman was a control freak. He was intense. He wanted soldiers who followed orders, not artists who improvised. Terry was pure improvisation. The conflict was immediate and ugly. There are stories from the practice facility in Richfield, stories that were kept out of the papers back then. Terry rolling his eyes during film sessions, Terry openly challenging the coach's plays in front of the rookies. It was a power struggle. Musselman wanted to break Terry's ego to build him into a team player, but you couldn't break Terry Furlow. You could only make him explode. The Cleveland exile was a miserable time. The city itself was struggling, gray, cold, and industrial, reminding him, perhaps, too much of Flint, the place he had tried so hard to escape. His numbers on the court were decent, but his body language screamed, "Get me out of here." The front office in Cleveland realized quickly that they had made a mistake. They didn't have a shooting guard. They had a ticking time bomb. They tried to reach him. They tried to get him to focus. But by this point, the lifestyle had its claws deep in him. He was late. He was moody. He was unpredictable. The whispers grew louder. "Don't trade for Furlow. He's cancer to a locker room." The suitcase was packed again. Another city, another jersey. This time, it was the Atlanta Hawks, the Deep South. Atlanta was a different vibe. It was flashy, it was fast, and it had a nightlife that rivaled New York or Los Angeles. For a man struggling with temptation, Dropping him into Atlanta was like throwing a match into a pool of gasoline. However, there was a glimmer of hope here. The Hawks had a young assistant coach named Mike Fratello. Fratello was sharp. He saw people, not just stats. He looked at Terry, and he didn't just see a troublemaker. He saw a human being in pain. He saw a young man who was incredibly gifted, but completely lost. Fratello would later say that Terry was one of the most talented one-on-one players he had ever seen. If you needed a bucket, Fratello said, Terry could get you a bucket against anyone. But Fratello also saw the paranoia. Terry was becoming jumpy. He was suspicious of people's motives. The chemical imbalance caused by the substances he was using was starting to rewire his brain. He felt like the world was against him. He felt like the NBA was a conspiracy designed to keep him down. There were moments in Atlanta where it looked like he might turn it around. He had flashes of brilliance. But consistency requires discipline, and discipline requires a clear head. Terry's head was filled with noise. The Hawks' management, usually patient, ran out of road. They couldn't trust him. And in professional sports, if a team can't trust you, they can't use you. The warning signs were flashing red. Everyone could see it. His former teammates, his agents, the coaches, they all knew Terry was driving toward a cliff. But in the culture of the 70s, nobody intervened. Nobody staged an intervention. Nobody sent him to rehab. They just traded him. They passed the problem to someone else. Here, the league seemed to say, he's your problem now. And so we arrive at the final stop, the Utah Jazz. It is almost poetic in a dark, twisted way. The Utah Jazz had just moved from New Orleans to Salt Lake City. They were a team in transition, playing in a city that was the polar opposite of everything Terry Furlow represented. Salt Lake City is the headquarters of the Mormon Church. It is conservative, quiet, family-oriented. The nightlife ended early. The liquor laws were strict. There were no flashing discos, no street hustlers on every corner. It was clean. It was orderly. For a moment, just a brief, shining moment, it looked like this environment might actually save him. Terry arrived in Utah, and something clicked. Maybe it was the lack of distractions. Maybe it was the realization that this was his last chance. If he failed here, he was out of the league. He knew it. He started playing the best basketball of his life. The 1979-1980 season was his masterpiece. He wasn't just a bench player anymore. He was a key weapon. He averaged 16 points a game. He was explosive. The highlight came in a game against the Denver Nuggets. Terry was unstoppable. He poured in 37 points. He was hitting from everywhere. Jump shots, drives to the basket, free throws. He looked like the superstar he had promised to be back in Michigan State. The crowd in Utah, who were initially skeptical of this flashy outsider, began to cheer for him. For a few months, the narrative changed. People started saying, Furlow has matured. Furlow has found a home. The Jazz saved him. But this is a tragedy, not a fairy tale. And in a tragedy, the moment of greatest hope is often just the setup for the final fall. While Terry was putting up numbers on the scoreboard, the shadow was creeping back in. You can take the man out of the party, but you can't take the party out of the man, especially when that man has the resources to fly the party to him. How does a man like Terry Furlow survive in Salt Lake City? He adapts, but not in a healthy way. He lived a double life that was almost cinematic in its contrast. By day, he was the professional athlete, wearing the Jazz uniform, signing autographs for polite Mormon kids, and practicing hard. He was charming. People who met him during this time often described him as intelligent and engaging. He had a smile that could light up a room. But when the sun went down, the other Terry emerged. He didn't find the trouble in Salt Lake City, he imported it. He kept his connections to the underworld of Detroit, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. He spent a fortune on phone calls. He flew friends in, and according to persistent rumors that have dogged his legacy for 40 years, he had packages delivered. He was lonely. We cannot underestimate the crushing loneliness of being a young, black, flashy superstar in a city that felt like a different planet to him. He was an alien in Utah. He didn't fit in with the culture. He didn't have a support system. His teammates were colleagues, not brothers, so he retreated into his shell. His apartment became his fortress, and inside that fortress the old habits returned with a vengeance. The Valium to sleep, the white lady to wake up, the alcohol to blur the edges. He was functioning, but barely. On the court, he ran on instinct and talent. Off the court, he was running on fumes. As the season wound down in the spring of 1980, the cracks were widening again. He was restless. He was making frantic plans for the off-season. He told people he needed to get away, that he needed to take care of business. What business? That is the question that haunts us. Was it business with an agent? Or was it business with the kind of people who don't sign contracts, but who settle debts with lead pipes and silence? The season ended. The Jazz packed up for the summer. Most players went home to their families to rest. Terry Furlow got into his Mercedes-Benz. He didn't look like a man going on vacation. He looked like a man on a mission. He told the Jazz he would see them next season. He lied. Or maybe he just didn't know that the clock had already started ticking down the final hours of his life. The calendar turned to May 1980. The NBA season was over for the Utah Jazz. The locker rooms were emptied, the jerseys washed and folded away for the summer. For most players, this is the time to exhale. It is time for beaches, for family barbecues, for healing the body after 82 grueling games. But Terry Furlow did not go to a beach, and he did not go home to Flint, Michigan, to see his mother immediately. Instead, he got into his silver Mercedes-Benz 450 SL and pointed the nose of the car east. He was heading back to Ohio. Why Ohio? This is the first piece of the puzzle that doesn't quite fit. He had played for the Cleveland Cavaliers, yes, but his time there had been miserable. He had fought with the coaches. He had been traded away. Why return to the scene of his unhappiness? Friends say he had business to attend to. But what kind of business forces a man to drive across half the country? The atmosphere around Terry in those final days was heavy. It was charged with static electricity. Witnesses who saw him said he seemed restless, like a caged animal pacing back and forth. He was making phone calls, hushed, intense conversations that ended abruptly when others walked into the room. He arrived in the Cleveland area, specifically staying around the suburbs. The skies over Ohio that May were often gray, matching the mood of the industrial Midwest. Terry wasn't checking into a holiday resort. He was checking back into a life he was supposed to have left behind. He was reconnecting with old acquaintances. And in the world Terry inhabited, old acquaintances usually meant people who could provide him with the chemical escape he craved. Was he there to pay off a debt? Was he there to collect money owed to him? Or was he simply drawn back to the chaos, addicted not just to the substances, but to the dangerous lifestyle that Cleveland's underworld offered him? We may never know the exact purpose of that trip, but we know one thing. He was walking into a trap of his own making. It is the night of May 22nd, the last night of Terry Furlow's life. He ends up at the home of a friend and former teammate, Foots Walker. Walker was a solid player for the Cavaliers, a guy known for his speed and his assists. But on this night, he wasn't a point guard. He was a host to a man who was unraveling. The details of that evening are hazy, filtered through the memory of those who were there, and the haze of time. It wasn't described as a wild Caligula-style orgy of destruction. It was more intimate, just guys hanging out. But the ingredients of disaster were on the table. There was alcohol, there was laughter, sure, but was it genuine? Or was it the manic laughter of a man trying to drown out the noise in his head? Terry was celebrating the end of his best season in years. He should have been talking about his future, about his contract extension, about how he was going to dominate the league next year. But as the hours ticked by, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., the mood shifted. At some point, in the deepest part of the night, Terry decided it was time to leave. Why leave at 3 in the morning? He had nowhere to be. He could have slept on the couch. He could have waited for the sun to rise. But the chemical cocktail in his blood was calling the shots now. It gave him false energy. It whispered to him that he was alert, that he was fine, that he was the king of the road. Footswalker surely must have seen the state his friend was in. Did he try to stop him? Did he try to take the keys? In the 1980s, the culture was different. You didn't tell a grown man, especially a star like Terry Furlow, what to do. You didn't challenge him. So Terry walked out the door. The heavy door of the Mercedes clicked shut. The engine roared to life, a German-engineered beast capable of incredible speeds. He pulled out onto the dark streets of suburban Ohio. He was alone. The cabin of the car was his kingdom, and he was driving straight into the mouth of the abyss. Let's reconstruct the final moments. We are on Interstate 71. The highway is empty. The streetlights flick by like a strobe light. The car is a silver bullet cutting through the night. The speedometer climbs 60, 80, 100, 120 miles per hour. That is 193 kilometers per hour. At that speed, the world blurs. Peripheral vision vanishes. You are in a tunnel. The car approaches the Lindale area. There is a slight curve. At legal speeds it is nothing, a gentle bend. But at 120, it is a sharp turn. Physics takes over. The tires lose their grip on the asphalt. The Mercedes, despite all its engineering, becomes a projectile. Here is the chilling detail that the police investigators noted in their logbooks. No skid marks. This is crucial. Usually in a car accident, you see black rubber streaks on the road. It means the driver saw the danger. It means the driver panicked and slammed on the brake pedal. It is a human instinct to try to survive. But Terry Furlow did not brake. Did he pass out? Was he so intoxicated that his brain simply disconnected from his body? Or, and this is the thought that chills the blood, did he see the pole coming and simply choose not to turn? The impact was catastrophic. The Mercedes slammed into a utility pole and a steel fence post. The sound would have been like a bomb going off. Metal crumpled like paper. The engine block was pushed back. The luxury car was instantly transformed into a coffin. Silence returned to I-71. Just the ticking of the cooling metal and the wind blowing through the shattered windows. The golden boy of Flint, the hope of the Utah Jazz, was gone. The violence of the crash was so severe that survival was a mathematical impossibility. When the body was taken to the Cuyahoga County Coroner's office, the real investigation began. The physical cause of the end was obvious: blunt force trauma. But Dr. Lester Adelson, the chief deputy coroner, wanted to know why. He ordered a full toxicology screen, and when the results came back, they painted a picture of a man who was chemically at war with himself. The report was explosive. First, they found Valium, diazepam. Valium is a depressant, a downer. It is used to treat anxiety, muscle spasms, and trouble sleeping. It slows the brain down. It relaxes the muscles. It makes your reactions sluggish. Second, they found cocaine, a significant amount. Cocaine is a powerful stimulant, an upper. It races the heart. It fires up the neurons. It creates a sense of euphoria, invincibility, and paranoia. Third, there was alcohol. Let's analyze this mix. This is what addicts call speedballing. You take the cocaine to get high, to feel like a god, but then the heart beats too fast, the anxiety kicks in, the paranoia starts. So you take the Valium and drink the alcohol to bring yourself down, to smooth out the edge. It is a tug of war inside the central nervous system. The accelerator and the brake are being pressed at the floor simultaneously. Dr. Adelson stated that the drugs were present in therapeutic and abuse levels. But the combination? The combination is lethal for a driver. The cocaine gave him the confidence to drive at 120 miles per hour. The Valium and alcohol stole his ability to react to the curve. His brain was likely processing visual information too slowly. By the time his eyes saw the pole, His brain was still 5 seconds behind. He was driving a rocket ship with the reflexes of a sleepwalker. The report was a damning indictment of the NBA's drug culture. It wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a chemically induced execution. The police didn't just find a body, they found a crime scene inside the car. When they pried open the twisted doors of the Mercedes, the smell hit them. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the stale odor of spilled beer and the pungent, sweet smell of burnt marijuana. Scattered across the floorboards and the leather seats were the remnants of the party, empty beer cans, not just one or two, but enough to suggest he had been drinking while driving. And then the roaches, the burnt ends of marijuana cigarettes. This wasn't a man driving home from church. This was a mobile party unit. But then the rumors started. And this is where the story shifts from a traffic accident to a potential mystery. According to police reports, there was nothing of immense value found in the car other than the car itself and Terry's personal jewelry. But whispers on the street, and later, whispers in the locker rooms of the NBA, suggested something was missing. Terry was known to carry cash, lots of it. He didn't trust banks. He trusted his pockets. He was known to flash rolls of $100 bills. He was also rumored to carry a briefcase. Where was the money? Where was the briefcase? Did it burn in the crash? Did the first responders take it? Or, and here is the darkest theory, was there someone else at the scene? Someone who arrived before the police? The official report lists the beer and the marijuana. It lists the tragic state of the driver. But it does not account for the missing assets that his family and friends insisted he had with him. This gap in the evidence is the seed from which the conspiracy theories would grow. Was he just a reckless driver, or was he a target? The police closed the file quickly. Auto accident, DUI. Case closed. But for those who knew Terry, for those who knew the dangerous people he associated with, the empty passenger seat and the missing cash screamed that there was more to this story. The funeral was held in Flint. It was a gray day, the kind where the sky feels low enough to touch. The service was packed. The church pews were filled with people from two very different worlds. On one side, you had the people of Flint, the factory workers, the neighbors, the kids who had watched Terry dominate the playgrounds. They were there to mourn the local hero who didn't make it. On the other side, you had the giants, the NBA players, men who stood head and shoulders above the crowd, wearing expensive Italian suits that looked out of place in the gritty industrial town. Among them was Irvin Magic Johnson. Magic was the golden child of Michigan State, the man who had followed in Terry's footsteps. They were friends. They were brothers in the fraternity of basketball. To see Magic Johnson, usually the man with the $1 million smile, breaking down in tears, carrying the casket of his friend, it sent a shockwave through the room. But if you looked closely at the faces of the NBA players in that church, you didn't just see sadness, you saw fear. Why? Because they knew. They knew the lifestyle. They knew how close they all were to the edge. Terry was the first of their generation to fall off the cliff, but every man in that room knew it could have been him. There was a heavy silence among the players. The code of silence. Nobody spoke about the cocaine. Nobody spoke about the late nights. They spoke about his jump shot. They spoke about his smile. They eulogized the basketball player, but they buried the secrets of the man. It was a moment of collective denial. The league was grieving, yes, but it was also holding its breath, hoping that Terry's death was an anomaly, a freak accident, and not a symptom of a cancer that was eating the sport alive. Now, we must look at the facts and the theories. We have two ways to look at the death of Terry Furlow. The first is the official version, the police version, and frankly, it is the most plausible version. It is the story of hubris. Terry was 25 years old. He was an elite athlete. He had money. He had an ego that had been fed by fans since he was 15. When you are that young and that talented, you suffer from what psychologists call the invincibility complex. You truly believe you cannot die. You believe you can drink all night, take drugs, get behind the wheel of a high-performance sports car, and handle it. The toxicologist said his blood was a chemical war zone. In this version of the story, there is no villain in the shadows. There is no hitman. The villain is the bad decision. The villain is the culture that told him he was a god. He simply passed out. The lights went out in his brain while his foot was still heavy on the gas pedal. The lack of skid marks isn't a mystery. It's the proof of his unconscious state. He didn't suffer. He was gone before he hit the pole. It is a tragic, senseless waste of life, but it is just that, an accident. But then, there are the whispers, the street version. We cannot ignore the context of who Terry was hanging out with. He wasn't just partying with fans. He was rumored to be deeply entrenched with serious drug dealers in Cleveland and Detroit. And in that world, debts are not forgiven. The theory goes like this. Terry didn't just drive into a pole, he was chased. Remember the missing money? The rumors of the empty briefcase? Conspiracy theorists argue that Terry was meeting someone that night to settle a score. Maybe the meeting went wrong. Maybe he was fleeing for his life. If you are being chased at 120 miles per hour, you are looking in your rearview mirror, not at the road ahead. You are panicked. You are erratic. And what about the lack of skid marks? Some dark rumors suggest the car might have been tampered with, or perhaps he was run off the road by another vehicle that fled the scene into the darkness. There is no physical evidence to support this, no paint transfer from another car, no bullet holes, but the timing is suspicious. He was in Ohio for business. He was acting paranoid in the weeks leading up to his death. He told friends he wanted to get away. Does a man who just wants to go on vacation drive into a pole? Or does a man who is running from a predator lose control? We will likely never know the truth. The people who might know are either dead or they aren't talking. But the shadow of foul play has hung over this case for 40 years, adding a layer of noir mystery to the tragedy. Terry's death was not an isolated incident. It was the first domino. Look at what happened to the Utah Jazz right after. It was as if a dark cloud had parked itself over the franchise. Just months after Terry died, another star player, Bernard King, one of the greatest scorers in history, was arrested in Utah on serious sexual assault charges. The team was falling apart. The Mormon Mecca of Salt Lake City was becoming a graveyard for careers. And then, look at the league. Terry died in 1980. In the years that followed, the drug problem exploded. It culminated in 1986 with the death of Len Bias, the college phenomenon who died of a cocaine overdose 2 days after being drafted by the Celtics. When Len Bias died, the world screamed. Congress passed laws. The NBA cracked down. But Terry Furlow? Terry was the warning shot that nobody listened to. He was the canary in the coal mine. If the league had looked at Terry's death honestly, if they had admitted why he died instead of just calling it a car crash, maybe, just maybe, they could have saved the players who came after him. But they didn't. They let the party continue for another 6 years. Why was the investigation closed so quickly? The Lindale Police Department was small. They were dealing with a high-profile death. The NBA wanted it to go away. The family was in shock. It was convenient for everyone to label it a DUI and file the paperwork. An investigation into drug trafficking or foul play would have been messy. It would have dragged the NBA's reputation through the mud. It would have exposed the dealers who were preying on athletes. So the file was shut. The car was scrapped. The autopsy report was filed away in a dusty cabinet. To this day, there are questions. Where did he get the drugs that night? Who was the last person he spoke to? What happened to his money? These questions linger in the air like smoke. Justice, in the case of Terry Furlow, was swift, but was it thorough? Probably not. So, what is the legacy of Terry Furlow? He is not in the Hall of Fame. His jersey hangs in no rafters. If you ask a young NBA fan today who Terry Furlow was, they will look at you with a blank stare. He has been erased. but his legacy is written in the invisible ink of the NBA's rulebook. The strict drug policies we see today, the rookie transition programs that teach young players about the dangers of addiction and money management, those exist because of men like Terry. He was the sacrificial lamb of the cocaine era. He showed the world that talent is not enough. He showed that you can have a 40-inch vertical leap and a velvet jump shot, but if you cannot outrun your demons, you will crash. He is a tragic figure, an anti-hero. He wasn't a bad person. By all accounts, he was generous, funny, and fiercely loyal, but he was flawed. He was a product of a brutal environment, Flint, and a corrupt era, the 70s NBA. He was a flower that bloomed in a toxic garden, and eventually the poison got him. Picture an empty basketball court in Flint, Michigan. The sun is setting. The chain nets are rattling in the wind. It is quiet now. Somewhere in another timeline, Terry Furlow is an old man. He is sitting on a porch telling his grandkids about the time he dropped 37 points on the Nuggets. He is showing them his Hall of Fame ring. He is happy. But in our timeline, there is only a twisted guardrail on Interstate 71 and a tombstone in Michigan. Terry Furlow was a shooting star. And the thing about shooting stars is that they burn incredibly bright. They awe us with their brilliance, and then, in the blink of an eye, they vanish into the darkness. He wanted to be remembered as a king. He ended up as a cautionary tale. But tonight, for these few minutes, we remembered him. We looked past the scandal and saw the man. The game ended for Terry Furlow at 3 a.m. on a lonely highway. But the lesson of his life is still in overtime.